This is the DOD Grunge Distortion. Under its weird purple surface, this pedal actually holds some rather unique and surprisingly usable tones. The DOD Grunge is a foundational pedal in my journey of playing guitar and recording, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people. But it's more than just nostalgia that keeps bringing me back to this thing, because there's a couple of particular things that it does really well. So in this video, we'll take a quick dive into how it sounds, how it came to exist, and if it really has a place on today's pedal boards. Let's go. What's up everybody, how's it going? I'm Brad Dollar, welcome to the channel, it's great to see you. So this Grunge I have is the second version, deemed the FX69B, and it's definitely worth a quick Google search to go see what the original version looked like, just for the names of the overall tone controls. Beyond that, the biggest changes that I can see from the original to this is they actually made the tone controls themselves more useful than just being like a marketing gimmick. This thing sounds less like a chainsaw and more like an actual distortion pedal. So one of the tricks to this thing sounding good is it's best served going straight into the cleanest amp that you have, whether that's a real amp or an amp sim. Having tried this on every gain channel on every amp I've ever had and had this pedal at the same time with, I don't think it was ever meant to be used in front of a distortion channel. In fact, what I think it's really meant for is to go in like the front of a clean practice amp, like the Crate GX15 that I had growing up, which is exactly what this pedal was paired with. As if there wasn't enough distortion on that amp already that was pretty similar to what this actually sounds like, I had to put this thing in front of it. And even then, I remember putting it on the distortion channel of that amp and having this thing on was just so messy, it wasn't useful, even for my really crappy metal and rock and punk band of the time. So if anything, I think it's voiced to make small amps sound huge versus trying to make your classic Marshall Plexi or your Benson amp or whatever the boutique amp of the day is. I don't think it was designed to make that sound great. I think it was meant to like make cheap amps sound the best they possibly could. And having spun back down the Nirvana rabbit hole while making this video and just kind of recently in general, this pedal is not that far off from what his actual chain was, funnily enough. Even though he didn't actually use the Grunge pedal, he did use a DS1 in front of a super clean Mesa preamp into some solid state power amps. And that's kind of what this thing sounds like, which is probably why, again, it sounds really great in front of the cleanest signal you have. So for me, I'm using it here with this Mesa single rectifier, and this clean channel is great. It takes a lot before it starts breaking up. It's got a lot of headroom. So in some ways, it almost reduces my Mesa to feeling more like a practice amp, but definitely it responds much better than that little solid state Crate ever did. All right, so let's get right down into this thing. The controls on this version of the Grunge are really simple, so we'll go through these really quick. Loud is just the overall volume. I don't think this is like an input volume. I think this is like an overall like output volume, I guess you would say. And then you've got a low control, which is real woofy and by itself doesn't make a lot of sense. And the high control is real grainy and by itself doesn't make a lot of sense, but there's such a weird mid notch between these two. It almost sounds like a wah, like stuck in the middle position. And because of that, the extra graininess and woofiness of the highs and lows respectively definitely helps mitigate some of that mid-range. And then of course the Grunge control, which is like the overall amount of distortion. I'm playing through my 2024 Gibson Les Paul Standard of the 60s varietal. I'm going into the Grunge, out of the Grunge, and straight into my Mesa single rectifier, plugged into a Fry PS2A, and I've got the Neural DSP Mark II C+ amp suite pulled up, but I'm just using the cabs. I love that cab sim. I think it's one of my absolute favorites. Here's a little clean. right, switch it on. So right away, it's like everything that like is right and wrong about the solid state distortion feel. The first impression I actually get from this is it reminds me of my first amp ever, which was a Crate GX15. This sounds like that, like it sounds like that, like right off the bat, and I love that. So there's definitely, for me at least, there's some nostalgia baked into this. Here's the load control. So it goes from real high passy to real woofy right away. And then here's the high control. Oof, God, that's bad. So real low passy to just real grainy, just the worst kind of grain. And then here's the grunge. So no grunge at all. It's a little bright, but I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. Before we get going too far, if you can do me a huge favor and hit the subscribe and the like button, I'd super appreciate that. It does way more than you think to help me grow this channel, so thank you so much for doing that. Let's keep going. This pedal, under the right conditions, and they change constantly, it has some little surprises in it. Like, that's super fun to play through. That's a lot, but there's some sweet spots to this for sure. So if you get one of these, that's one of the first things to play with. Is just start trying to find the sweet spots for you and the amp you're playing with, or if you're DI or an amp sim or whatever you're using, and your guitar. Play with that combination and find your sweet spots. That's the most useful piece of tip and knowledge I have for this pedal and playing with this pedal is identify where works for you. Don't worry about like what the knobs say or what's what, and just go for it and find your sweet spots. So one of the things that I love to use this pedal for in the context of overdubs and even mixing is to create like small amp sounds. Yes, you could just use an amp sim, or you could just plug a small amp in and get this, but sometimes getting even a small amp to sound really small is sort of difficult. And this is a cool way to do this on the front end, on the way going in, to have a part inspired by that, which in the context of a song can be really nice, either right before a big part drops in, whatever the genre is, rock or pop, or right after, just to give that sense of dynamic range and things getting really big and then really empty all of a sudden. So, you'd record a part like that and then, maybe bring the lows back up and bring some of the grunge back up. And man, I'm really loving it. I mean, I think that obviously I bought this pedal and I own it, so I like using it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here, and I'm biased towards it quite clearly. But just it makes me feel all kinds of different feelings about my whole life of playing guitar. Maybe if you grew up only playing on like, you know, Fender Deluxes and Champs, or maybe if you started playing guitar now and your only experience is really playing through amp sims, I can see how this wouldn't make sense. Or maybe it does make sense because you get to explore it and try something totally new, but there's just something that feels like all of the amps of that era. It's not like it's my favorite guitar tone ever, but it's a guitar tone. And it's one that's in the toolbox and pretty easy to call up and put to use and get this sound right away, no matter what you're playing or what you're playing through it. If you wanted to get this kind of feel, you wanted to make it feel like a Crate GX15, or, you know, I know there's like a new love affair coming back with some of the PV amps. Like it's all in here. And I don't want to overhype it like it's like the end all be all of pedal. It's definitely like an effects type of distortion. Anything that I love about this pedal is that it's definitely not a tube screamer. It's really not a DS1 or an SD1 or any of like the normal suspects. The closest thing it feels to is maybe like a Rat, but it's not as useful or as clean or as like mid-range focused as that. This is just a lot messier, but in a really cool way. So I think that's what I love about it. And if you're looking to pick one up, just have that in mind. And like we talked about earlier, you're definitely going to want to explore it and find your sweet spots to really make it work with whatever you're using. And one thing that I do love about this is that if you want that really blown out full frequency distortion that like you hear on some songs on Nevermind, and honestly like in a bunch of just like heavy music in general, where it's just a distortion pedal going into a DI, or even like back in the day they would just take the output of an amp and run that straight in, so it's really brittle and brash, and there's no speaker simulation in it. There's something really cool about that when used in context of layers as you're working on a song. Sometimes a pedal like a tube screamer or just trying to overdrive a Neve preamp almost makes it sound too classic. This thing makes it sound really fresh right away, which is also a cool part of it. I think because the modern tone structure in people's heads is so driven towards something warm and punchy and Fendery and Marshall-y and all those types of gooey things, and you know, with Les Pauls and SGs and Strats and all the vintage vibe, this thing doesn't have vintage vibe to it, except that it's old, and I guess grunge is vintage at this point, but it just sounds more modern, even though it's an old pedal and an old design. So you can get some really, really fresh things out of it if you play with it. And that's one of my biggest takeaways from this. My biggest takeaway for you if you get this pedal, and why I would recommend this pedal to you, is there's a lot of nuance to it. And though there aren't a million sweet spots, there are several sweet spots in there depending on what your instrument is and your amp and things like that. So if you get one, definitely play with it, and don't worry about like what the knobs say or what they're set at, whether that's a calibration thing or just the quality of the tone controls overall. I love using it for small amp sounds. Rolling the grunge all the way back and pushing the front end of the amp has a nice kind of spongy feel to it. The lows are extra woofy, and you can do cool things with that as well. And though I don't think there's any room for using this thing with the highs boosted, when they're rolled off, they're so brash and bright that they're still pushing some harmonic information upwards. So it doesn't get totally just cut off on the high frequency. It doesn't get super dull or anything. Definitely, if anything, it's not dull. And the biggest thing you're fighting with and playing with this is that mid-range hump that's built into it. I don't know if that's because of the low and high controls or how they work together that's creating that. I think there's just a hump to the circuit. So pedal modders out there, maybe there's a way to get that out of there, but I think if you took it out of there, then it would just sound like a Rat or like a Metal Zone, or something like that. And it's cool that this thing is its own thing.
His own thing.
And then real quick, let's just hear how this thing takes effects. Now, usually when you pair a distortion pedal and a delay and it's this kind of distortion and it's a little crazy and heavy, man, I think those delays can sound really messy. It's a sound for sure, but it's really hard to like feel the energy of the repeat, and it just creates like this really like messy guitar sound. However, I've got one plugged in and I've got its 90s counterpart, the DOD analog delay, the FX96. Just set up with a kind of simple repeat. Let's just hear what this thing sounds like for fun when it's hooked up with another pedal in the chain, in this case a delay pedal, which a lot of us like to use. Alright, so let's wrap it up. Overall, I would classify this pedal on the effects end of the distortion and overdrive spectrum. It's not like a pedal board mainstay or regular use item like a tube screamer or something like that. It's way more of something that you turn on for certain parts, or build certain songs around, or overdub with, or something like that. I'm sure someone out there can play with this thing and find a really cool sweet spot and justify having it on their pedal board. I'm sure someone out there does. I'd love to know if you do, because there are some really useful tones. But overall, it's one of those things that I think like lives in your studio space or your pedal board toolkit, and you bring it out when you really need this very specific sound. I don't want to diminish this pedal to just being like a practice amp in a box. It is more than that. It just really depends on how you play with it and how you use it, and the context of, again, most importantly, as we always say on this channel, the songs that you're working on. There's no rules when it comes to this, but the most important thing that you can do when you're dialing anything in is to make sure that it works for the music that you're working on right now. This pedal that's been floating around my life for the better part of 20 plus years still has things that it does that's useful, and there's like 3 or 4 pedals in this thing if you really get it to work with what you're playing with. There's probably more. So play with your gear, find the tones that are hidden inside of it, and don't just write things off because as soon as you plug it in, it doesn't give you like the instant wow. A lot of stuff doesn't do that, and some of the best things are found when you really dig beneath the surface, find the diamonds hidden in the rough, find the gems that are just waiting for you to get the knobs in the right place. Before you know it, you found something really unique, magical, and individual to you. All right, so that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think about this pedal, if it brings up some great memories for you, and if anybody out there's got one on their pedal board, I'd love to know, because you deserve a round of applause. So thanks so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye.